The story begins with a young girl named Maddie sitting in the bleachers in the school gym while her classmates gather for a school event. Principal Hartman then takes the floor along with his magnificent mustache, addressing the assembly about an ongoing missing person case in their town. Maddie observes the reactions of those around her and overhears some students mention that blood was discovered in the boiler room. Before long, Principal Hartman presents a photo on the projector, revealing that the missing person they're discussing is none other than Maddie herself. Shortly after, Charlie, a spirit who's been haunting the school since the 90s, joins Maddie on the bleachers. Strangely, he assures Maddie that it's only a matter of time before everyone realizes she's no longer alive. Afterward, Charlie introduces Maddie to the Split River High Afterlife Support Group, which is led by another spirit named Mr. Martin. Their high school, as it turns out, is home to numerous ghosts of students and faculty members who have passed away over the years. During their conversation, Maddie mentions that her blood was discovered in the boiler room, though her body has never been found. Wally, a fellow spirit, speculates that she might have been murdered. As she tries to piece together her own situation, Maddie reminisces about the moments she shared with her boyfriend Xavier and her best friends Simon and Nicole. In the present, Maddie follows Xavier, and she's devastated to witness his deteriorating state. Following the support group meeting, Charlie takes Maddie on a tour, introducing her to other spirits who met their end at the school. As they explore, they stumble upon Maddie's vandalized missing person poster. However, when she tries to tear it down, Charlie explains that she can't alter anything in the world of the living. Later, Simon vents his frustrations, questioning Xavier as to why he hasn't volunteered for Maddie's search party. The situation escalates further, with Xavier trying to leave and Simon stopping him by grabbing his backpack. In the process, the bag tears open and unveils Maddie's missing phone, leaving everyone perplexed. Afterward, Charlie confides in Maddie, revealing that he passed away due to an anaphylactic shock triggered by peanut oil. He also reveals that his classmates taunted him for being gay even after his death. Meanwhile, Simon confides in Nicole, insisting he knows that Xavier's responsible. However, Nicole implores him to remain positive, believing that there's a chance Maddie's safe and will soon return. Shortly after, their attention's drawn to another student named Claire, trying to reach out to Xavier outside the principal's office. On the other hand, Maddie encounters another spirit named Wally, who met his demise in 1984 during a homecoming game due to a fatal injury. He then offers to help Maddie investigate her death, but she declines. In a flashback, it's revealed that Xavier stole her phone when she was distracted after spotting her mother at school. Returning to the present, Maddie informs Wally that her phone and necklace are missing. Now, Maddie implores Wally to help her obtain a confession from Xavier by scaring him, but Charlie explains that it doesn't work that way. Disheartened by this response, Maddie tries to leave the school premises, but repeatedly finds herself in the boiler room with bloodstains marked with evidence tags. After several more attempts, Dawn, another spirit, explains that she can't leave the school grounds, presumably because it's where she met her end. Afterward, Maddie returns to the meeting where she learns that Rhonda was murdered by her school guidance counselor. As they talk, the rest of the school, as well as Maddie's mother, enters the gym, preparing for her surveillance. Outside the gym, Sheriff Baxter interrogates his son, Xavier, who confesses that he's cheating on Maddie with Claire. Xavier then explains that he'd accidentally sent a message meant for Claire to Maddie and had taken her phone to delete it. Heartbreakingly, Maddie overhears this entire conversation and is devastated to discover that he was cheating on her the entire time. As Sheriff Baxter places Xavier in the police car, Simon suddenly appears to be able to see Maddie in her ghostly state. However, his initial confusion gradually transforms into surprise as he realizes he can talk to her spirit. Afterward, Charlie cautions Maddie, advising her not to reveal her ability to communicate with the living, as the other spirits might try to exploit her to relay messages to the other side. Elsewhere, Sheriff Baxter advises Xavier to remain at home and let the investigation run its course. He also reveals that the crime scene analysis confirmed that the blood found in the school's boiler room belonged to Maddie. Following this, Xavier avoids contact with Claire and she visits him at his home despite the potential risks involved. During their conversation, Xavier expresses his fear that Maddie's body might be discovered. Later, Sheriff Baxter asks him if he knows anything about Maddie's phone being replaced. It turns out that her phone didn't have any useful information on it, but Xavier insists that he couldn't even unlock her phone. Subsequently, Maddie leads Simon to an old auto shop that she and Xavier frequently visited, hoping to find something valuable. Their search proves fruitful as Simon stumbles upon a piece of what he believes to be Maddie's phone. At school, Mr. Anderson, their teacher, arrives and shows his reluctance to give up hope that Maddie's still alive. Trusting the teacher, Maddie suggests that Simon should give the evidence they found to Mr. Anderson for further investigation. She also expresses concerns that if it ends up in the hands of the sheriff, it could be destroyed as potential evidence to protect his son. Reluctantly, Simon hands the piece of the phone over to Mr. Anderson. Elsewhere, Xavier visits Maddie's mother, Sandra, who's clearly distraught over her daughter's disappearance. When asked about Maddie, Xavier claims that he was in the restroom trying to figure out the passcode for her phone when she disappeared. Shortly after, Sandra mentions that the police confiscated Maddie's phone. However, Xavier suggests that the phone that the police have taken might not belong to her, and they both seem burdened by guilt for how they treated Maddie. In the meantime, Simon warns Maddie about the possibility that Sheriff Baxter may not carry out a thorough murder investigation. Later, they return to the old auto shop in search of more clues, and they stumble upon another piece of Maddie's phone. Just as Simon reaches out to pick it up, Mr. Anderson unexpectedly arrives and warns him to let the police investigate the case. Subsequently, Maddie observes Mr. Anderson escorting Simon to his car, advising him not to reveal what they discovered. Simon then boldly questions why he was in the old auto shop at such a late hour, but Mr. Anderson refuses to answer. While Maddie maintains her belief in her teacher's innocence, Simon's suspicions continue to grow. In a flashback, Maddie hands her essay to Mr. Anderson, who kindly offers her a listening ear if she ever needs someone to talk to. The teacher then gives her a sobriety coin that once belonged to his father, revealing his own shared experiences of growing up with an alcoholic parent. In a moment of vulnerability, Mr. Anderson writes down his phone number as a lifeline for the struggling student. In the present, Xavier returns to school and is met with disdainful looks and sarcastic comments. On the other hand, Simon asks Nicole to distract Mr. Anderson so that he can steal his teacher's car keys. With the keys in hand, he aims to uncover potentially incriminating evidence against the seemingly innocent teacher. Surprisingly, he stumbles upon the same fragment of Maddie's phone, revealing that Mr. Anderson never reported this crucial piece of evidence to the police. In another flashback, Maddie recalls the night she called Mr. Anderson after crashing her car, and he came to her rescue. Back in the present, Maddie shares the story of that night when Mr. Anderson helped her after she crashed her mother's vehicle. However, when Simon questions her actions and why she didn't call him during the incident, Maddie gets infuriated. Following this, it's revealed that Xavier has been secretly monitoring Simon and Nicole's text conversations at the library. Just then, Nicole receives a notification that Maddie has liked her old photo of the elevator control room, which used to be their gathering place. Nicole hurriedly leaves the library to get there, and Xavier starts following her. As Xavier approaches her, Nicole implies that he must have been the one who lured her up there, perhaps intending to kill her as well. However, he strongly proclaims his innocence and even mentions that a statement from Mr. South, a janitor, cleared him of any involvement in Maddie's murder. During their conversation, Nicole emphasizes the need to prove that Maddie's still alive. Since the police tend to slow down their efforts when there's no new evidence, they decide to take matters into their own hands. Simultaneously, Simon inquires with Mr. Anderson about the police's response to the discovery of the phone fragment. However, he openly admits that he still has it because he lacks trust in the authorities. Moreover, he expresses his concern about Simon's involvement becoming a part of the investigation. Elsewhere, Maddie questions Rhonda about her relationship with the guidance counselor, Mr. Manfredo. In response, Rhonda describes him as the kindest person she ever met, but when she receives the results of her college applications, he becomes inexplicably furious. Believing their relationship was more than it actually was, Mr. Manfredo falsely accused Rhonda of being in a romantic relationship with him. Despite her efforts to reason with him, Mr. Manfredo's anger escalated to a horrifying degree, ultimately leading to her tragic murder. While he was arrested and eventually died in prison, Rhonda confesses that she never found closure in her life. Meanwhile, Nicole, Xavier, and Sandra gather near the woods to search for Maddie. As they scour the area, Nicole stumbles upon a ticket with a footprint, likely belonging to Maddie. This ticket turns out to be for the event that Maddie was planning to attend with Xavier. Back at the high school, Maddie mentions to Simon that they can only communicate in rooms where someone has died. They then continue their investigation within Mr. Anderson's room. During this time, Maddie confides in him about the actual story of her car accident and discloses that the accident was the result of her mother's drunk driving. It turns out that she'd reached out to Mr. Anderson to prevent this incident from becoming public knowledge, as she feared that the police would arrest her mother. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by Mr. Anderson entering the room. Simon and Maddie swiftly hide themselves in the closet, eavesdropping on the teacher's frantic phone conversation. He mentions that he shouldn't have given money to Maddie and insists that this time they're gonna do things his way. Maddie is left utterly shocked by this revelation, as she has no memory of ever receiving money from her teacher. As Mr. Anderson angrily leaves the room, Maddie notices a shifted tile in the closet and points it out to Simon. They then open the odd tile, only to discover a stash of cash hidden within the wall. Simon suggests that this money might be linked to Maddie's death, hinting that Mr. Anderson may be involved in something far more sinister than they initially believed. Following this, Maddie tries to crack Mr. Anderson's phone passcode to find more answers. Simon, who's seated nearby, does his best to ignore her as she vents her frustration about being unable to access the phone. Afterward, Maddie pushes him to take action to find out who the teacher spoke to about the money the previous night. As soon as the exam's over, Simon steals Mr. Anderson's phone and hastily leaves the classroom. Afterward, Maddie inquires with the Afterlife support group, asking if they've witnessed anything suspicious or unusual about Mr. Anderson. Unfortunately, none of the spirits possess any useful information. Simultaneously, Simon hides Anderson's phone in his locker when Nicole approaches. She informs him that the police tracked the footprints in the woods to a service road, suggesting the possibility that Maddie is still alive. Upon hearing this, Simon tries to explain that he's been communicating with Maddie's spirit, but Nicole dismisses it as part of his grieving process. Later, Simon comes close to being caught with Mr. Anderson's phone when it pings with a notification for a lost phone. He then glances down the hallway to find the teacher tracking his phone, walking in his direction. In a desperate move, he tosses the phone on top of a row of lockers and swiftly escapes. Meanwhile, Nicole interviews Claire for the journalism club, asking about her thoughts on the possibility of being the homecoming queen. However, her frustration grows when she realizes that Claire is simply taking advantage of Maddie's disappearance to gain more votes for the homecoming queen title. Following the interview, Nicole meets up with Xavier, who suggests that Claire has a pattern of cutting people out of her life. She gets frustrated and confronts Xavier, questioning if he has a closer connection to Claire than he did with Maddie. Nicole's concerns continue to grow, and she even questions whether he's withholding information from her. In the meantime, Simon suddenly barges into the Afterlife support group, insisting that he needs to talk to Maddie. The other spirits quickly realize that Maddie can communicate with the living, and they follow the two of them to the bus stop to eavesdrop on their conversation. During their conversation, Simon admits to taking Mr. Anderson's phone and expresses his growing concern that the situation is spiraling out of control. Initially, they decide to leave Mr. Anderson's phone where Simon discarded it earlier. However, he later speaks with the principal and shares the evidence he's found, including Mr. Anderson's potential involvement. Afterward, Maddie tries to locate another spirit named Mina, hoping to gain insights into the school's history. However, Mina appears to believe she's still part of a school play and spends her time preparing for it, offering no help. Ultimately, Maddie decides to move on, and during her exploration, stumbles upon a devil mascot sticker that she doesn't recognize. Shortly after, she encounters Dawn in the theater and asks if she's witnessed anything suspicious about Mr. Anderson. Unfortunately, she also claims to have seen nothing of the sort. Afterward, Mr. Anderson talks to a female police officer, and Simon is apprehended by the police for questioning. Despite Maddie's attempts to communicate with him, he's unable to hear her. Outside of school, Nicole presses Xavier to reveal more about his relationship with Claire. Finally, he opens up with the truth about his infidelity, leading Nicole to blame him for Maddie's disappearance. She then asks him to stay in the car while she goes on her search for Maddie at a festival. Unfortunately, Nicole yields no information about Maddie's whereabouts at the festival. Xavier then joins in her search, and Nicole proceeds to channel her frustration on him. Surprisingly, he confesses to feel guilty for hurting Maddie. Nicole also admits how she's struggling to come to terms with the idea that her best friend might be gone for good. At the police station, Simon provides a detailed account of all the information he possesses regarding Mr. Anderson. This includes information about a hidden stash of money and the fragment of Maddie's phone that Simon had given to him. Ultimately, the police raise the possibility that Maddie might have staged the crime scene and her own disappearance, possibly to frame her teacher in the process. Back at the school, Charlie comforts Maddie after Simon's arrest as she expresses her feelings of being powerless. He then shares his own experience and opens up about his former crush, Emilio, who now works as a teacher at the school. Charlie goes on to reveal that he was upset with Emilio for accidentally outing his homosexuality to his parents. Sadly, Charlie never had the chance to express his romantic feelings to Emilio or to convey his forgiveness before his passing. Later, Maddie hands Mina a bouquet of flowers, and she finally shares information about Mr. Anderson's secret workshop at the theater. The group of spirits explores the theater further and finds an invoice for marching band gear signed by Anderson, totaling $40,000. Maddie eventually finds Simon, who's returned to the school to retrieve Mr. Anderson's phone and turn it in. As she shares the information about the invoice, Simon bursts into a faculty meeting with the new band uniforms. In a dramatic revelation, it comes to light that Mr. Anderson has been embezzling funds from the school by claiming to purchase new uniforms for the students. In reality, he's been swapping the mascot stickers on the old retired uniforms and presenting them as new, all while pocketing the money. As they watch Mr. Anderson being taken away, Maddie wonders if her death might be connected to the uniform scandal. That evening, Maddie urges Charlie to write a letter to Emilio, promising to ensure he receives it. Just then, she notices Dawn taking a selfie with a student's phone she found in the theater. When Maddie asks if the phone was locked, Dawn confidently claims to know everyone's passcodes. Right away, Maddie rushes to inform Simon before he leaves and shares Mr. Anderson's phone passcode with him. Together, they check the teacher's phone, hoping to find who he was speaking to the previous night. To their surprise, they find the number and decide to make the call. Elsewhere, Claire notices a missed call from Mr. Anderson's number and becomes visibly distressed. It becomes apparent that the teacher was actually speaking with Claire about the money the other night. Having received a missed call, she waits outside Mr. Anderson's house, anxious to have a conversation with him about what he said to the police. Back at school, Wally's spotted doing push-ups with Rhonda on his back, excited for the upcoming homecoming game. Although Mr. Martin notices Maddie's absence from the group, he emphasizes that they should maintain their focus on the upcoming game. Meanwhile, the other students are preparing to cast their votes for the homecoming queen and king. It's revealed that Maddie and Simon have been secretly observing Claire for a whole week, yet they haven't discovered any incriminating evidence. Elsewhere, the police reach out to Maddie's mother, Sandra, to inform her that they found Maddie's bag in an abandoned building. The police have their suspicions that someone may have been living there illegally. Sandra then shares this development with Xavier, firmly convinced that the person in question is none other than Maddie. Back at school, Maddie and Charlie eavesdrop on Claire's conversations and notice her trying to gather information about Mr. Anderson from Principal Hartman. However, the principal only reveals that Mr. Anderson is currently on administrative leave. Claire then issues a warning, mentioning that her parents might withdraw their future donations from the school if they get entangled in any scandal. Meanwhile, at school, Nicole informs Simon about the discovery of Maddie's backpack. Simon speculates that she got wind of the news from Xavier and raises concerns about the possibility of a weapon being found in the bag. Just then, Xavier chimes in, revealing that Claire's stepfather owns the entire block and has plans to demolish the house. However, Simon becomes visibly frustrated as Xavier tries to defend Claire. In the school gym, Wally confides to Maddie, telling her that his parents have attended every homecoming game since his passing. Just then, she looks up and notices her mother, Sandra, who's arrived at the school under the belief that her daughter is coming back. Simultaneously, Simon manages to get the key to Mr. Anderson's classroom, where he discovers that Claire was getting straight A's in spite of her incomplete work. Maddie also finds this suspicious, but lets it go so that her mother can hold on to hope that she's returning. Conversely, Claire eventually confronts Mr. Anderson, who reassures her that he has an alibi for the night Maddie went missing and is not under suspicion in the case. Nevertheless, when Claire asks whether her name was brought up, he replies that he doesn't recall his statement and asks her to leave. Back at school, Wally reaches out to Maddie, and they connect over their shared experiences. He shares how his mother, Bea, always pushed him to excel in everything. Wally further opens up about the immense effort he put into making his mother proud, only to pass away before he could achieve one last victory during a homecoming game. Later that evening, Xavier investigates the abandoned building where the police discovered Maddie's bag, and he spots someone fleeing. He then goes to Maddie's home to help Sandra and meet Simon, who had come to inquire about the bag. Right away, Xavier informs him about the person he saw at the abandoned house. When Simon questions if it could have been Claire, Xavier denies seeing the person's face. Sandra then asks both of them to help distribute missing posters of Maddie at the school game, hoping that she'll return home. At the homecoming game, Wally relives his best moments, but he confides in Maddie that he doesn't really enjoy playing football. He did it to make his mom happy. Maddie shares her own experiences with her alcoholic mom and tells Wally that he has the freedom to choose what he truly desires. Being dead, he can release himself from his obligations to his mom. While the game is ongoing, Wally comments to Maddie that the empty seat next to his mother is likely meant for him, and he proceeds to take that seat. Mr. Martin notices that everyone appears distracted during the game and requests that Rhonda keep an eye on Maddie. On the other hand, Claire arrives late and continues to act suspiciously, moving away from the sidelines when Sheriff Baxter passes by. At that moment, Sandra is approached by a teacher who informs her that Mr. Anderson has returned the stolen money to the police. Meanwhile, as they distribute posters, Simon, Nicole, and Xavier receive a video message. In the video, Claire threatens to expose Mr. Anderson for taking her parents' money unless he gives her an A. However, all three of them are puzzled as to why the message was sent specifically to them. Their conversation is interrupted when Sandra approaches and requests a ride home. Just then, Xavier receives a text from Simon asking to meet him at the parking lot. Consequently, Nicole offers to give Sandra a ride while Xavier heads to the parking lot. Once there, Maddie instructs Simon to have Xavier send an apology message to Claire. Simon then asks Xavier to invite Claire to be his date for the homecoming party. Simon guides him on what to write in the text. He realizes that the message is essentially what Maddie wanted to convey to Xavier. However, when Claire receives the text, she decides to ignore it. Back at the school, Wally expresses his gratitude to Maddie for her help in setting him free from his mother's obligations. He then invites her to be his homecoming date, and Maddie gladly accepts. On the way, Sandra asks if Nicole thinks Maddie will forgive her and return home. Nicole quickly reassures her, though she appears somewhat suspicious as she loads the boxes of flyers into her car's trunk. At the school, Simon finds Maddie and shares his suspicions that Mr. South, the janitor, may have recorded the conversation between Claire and Mr. Anderson. They decide to visit him, and Mr. South shows them a video of a blood-smeared wall in the boiler room that had been vandalized with graffiti. Maddie and Simon then decide to go back there to examine the writings. During their examination, Simon brings up the possibility that someone might have died there, as he can still communicate with her. Together, they stumble upon a hidden door that appears to have been used to remove Maddie's body from the boiler room. On the other hand, Claire shares her decision to attend the homecoming dance with Xavier with her friends, believing in his innocence regarding Maddie's murder. As Xavier receives the text from her, he promptly informs Simon and Nicole about the situation. Simon, in turn, suggests that he take the opportunity to connect with Claire during the homecoming dance and secretly record any confessions she might make. Afterward, Maddie joins Rhonda in searching for suitable dress in the school theater wardrobe. While looking through the dresses, Maddie curiously asks Rhonda whether spirits are capable of having relationships, hinting at her interest in dating Wally. Elsewhere, Charlie shares his letter with Maddie, addressing it to Emilio. However, she offers a different perspective, advising him to make it appear as if he'd written the letter before his passing. Moreover, she encourages Charlie to forgive himself and embrace his life as he moves forward. After their class, Simon pays a visit to Sandra, sharing memories of Maddie and the college plans they once had. Sandra, still holding on to hope that her daughter will return, asks if Maddie has reached out to Simon. Regrettably, he responds in the negative. As the night unfolds, Wally picks up Maddie for the dance and puts in the effort to make the evening special fun for her. In turn, Maddie also appreciates his thoughtful gestures, finding them genuinely sweet. On the other side of town, Claire picks up Xavier and questions him about his new friendship with Simon and Nicole. Xavier then opens up about feeling remorseful since they used to be Maddie's friends. Claire, in turn, believes his explanation and kisses him. During the dance, Simon opens up to Nicole, admitting that he once contemplated dating Maddie, but eventually chose not to pursue it. Meanwhile, Wally becomes the center of attention, although only visible to the other spirits. However, he observes Maddie preoccupied with Xavier and Claire, and can't help but feel deeply hurt. Wally then candidly confides in Maddie, suggesting that perhaps she isn't completely ready to embrace her existence as a spirit. In response, she argues that she's still relatively new to this afterlife experience. Back at home, Sandra hears someone and becomes convinced that it's Maddie. As she reaches out to Nicole for help, she offers to go to her, knowing that Simon is upset with Xavier. Meanwhile, Simon stays back and presents Emilio with Charlie's letter, pretending he found it in an old book in the library. Charlie watches Emilio crying as he reads the letter and experiences a significant breakthrough within himself. Simultaneously, Xavier makes every effort to charm Claire, but she becomes aware of his attempts to record their private moments. Finally, Xavier confesses his suspicion that Claire may have been involved in Maddie's death. He shows her the video of her threatening Mr. Anderson and questions if she'd also switched Maddie's phone. Caught off guard, Claire confesses that she had discovered Mr. Anderson's involvement in the embezzlement and resorted to blackmailing him for better grades. She then denies any involvement in Maddie's murder, but admits to swapping Maddie's phone. Furthermore, Claire reveals that she mistakenly believed that Maddie recorded a video in which she'd threatened Mr. Anderson. In an attempt to delete the video, she took Maddie's phone. However, when they were unable to unlock it, Mr. Anderson ended up destroying the phone. With no other option, she suggested that Mr. Anderson pay Maddie with an agreed-upon amount and persuade her to delete the video. In the meantime, the police finally decide to take action and conduct a thorough search of the abandoned house. During their search, they come across an item that appears to be a weapon, stained with what looks like blood. Sheriff Baxter then pays a visit to Sandra and shares the news of the discovery of a potential murder weapon. Additionally, the sheriff reveals that they believe that Maddie was murdered over money she was suspected of taking from Mr. Anderson and have already taken into custody a person of interest, Mr. South. Back at the dance, Charlie helps Maddie realize that she unintentionally neglected Wally throughout the night. He then advises her to refocus her attention on Wally, leading Maddie to go search for Wally. She eventually finds him and apologizes before sharing a passionate kiss. Afterward, Simon and Maddie overhear the principal discussing Mr. South's arrest in connection to Maddie's disappearance. Subsequently, Rhonda frantically scours what appears to be a basement, while Nicole is seen burying something as heavy rain pours down. The following day, Simon pays a visit to Nicole to check on her as she went off the grid over the weekend. However, she explains that she's been swamped with work on her portfolio and has a looming deadline. During their conversation, Simon notices that all of the pictures in her portfolio are of Maddie, which strangely leads to a defensive response from Nicole. At school, Maddie finds herself frustrated by her inability to recall her memories and to help Mr. South. In response, Mr. Martin reminds her that she's a ghost and cannot change anything in the human world. At this moment, Rhonda speculates that Maddie's brain might be trying to shield her from the trauma of her death by repressing certain memories. Wally, determined to help Maddie, presents a book that recommends triggering repressed memories through the senses. With the help of Rhonda and Charlie, Wally tries to recreate Maddie's last lunch, but their efforts yield no results. Afterward, Dawn proposes an alternative approach known as an anti-seance and offers to help Maddie through this process. On the other side, Xavier, Nicole, Claire, and Simon are determined to find a way to clear Mr. South's name. When Claire suggests that they could save him by identifying the real person who recorded the video of her and Mr. Anderson, Nicole noticeably becomes stressed. Simon suggests that they may have a better chance of accessing the evidence room to find any information the police might have against Mr. South. However, Nicole immediately opposes the idea, while the rest of the group agrees to it. Afterwards, Simon goes on to have an interview with the university graduates, but he deliberately sabotages his prospects of being accepted into the college. Meanwhile, Claire devises a plan to break her window and file a false report at the police station, claiming that she's being stalked. Simultaneously, Simon and Xavier sneak into the evidence room to uncover Maddie's case. During their investigation, Simon observes that the boot prints, allegedly belonging to Maddie, did not match hers. When he questions Xavier about whether he was with Nicole when she discovered these prints, it's revealed that they had agreed to separate while in the woods. Returning to the school, Nicole goes to the computer lab and consults her teacher about the possibility of permanently deleting files on the school computer. To her dismay, the teacher explains that the computer automatically backs up its files, making it impossible to permanently delete them. Later, Simon shares his theory about Nicole with Maddie, who insists on knowing the real reason behind him failing his interview. Simon then confides in her that he no longer sees a point in pursuing their original plans, and Maddie tells him that he must continue living his life. Simon revisits the topic of Nicole and speculates that she might be holding a grudge against them for labeling her a copycat of Maddie. However, Maddie disagrees and encourages Simon to focus on gathering evidence before jumping to any conclusions. That evening, Dawn prepares an anti-seance to help Maddie in recalling her last day. She offers to help Maddie and open up about her own story, recounting the events leading up to her untimely death. In a flashback, Dawn finds herself in a small room, overhearing her two best friends as they cruelly mock and laugh at her behind her back. As she tries to avoid drawing attention to herself, she accidentally spills a cup of soda, which then splashes onto an electric outlet. Unaware of the danger, she steps onto the wet area and grabs a light bulb, which tragically electrocutes her. Back in the present, she candidly states that her friends should have been the ones to die, not her, revealing the deep-seated resentment she carries into the afterlife. Meanwhile, Claire and Xavier persist in their efforts to gather evidence to clear Mr. South's name. Their investigation leads them to a logbook in which they discover that Nicole was present on the day the video was taken. However, when they learn that Nicole had skipped class, they suspect that she might be attempting to get rid of the evidence. After class, Maddie talks to Simon and expresses her openness to hearing his theory about Nicole. Her recent conversation with Dawn has made her realize that she needs to be open to finding the truth, even if it turns out to be painful. At that moment, Simon confesses his love for Maddie, even acknowledging his inner conflict between helping her solve her murder and helping her cross over to the other side. Following their conversation, Maddie and Simon set out to track down Nicole. They locate her in the computer lab, deleting copies of the video. As they confront her, Nicole comes clean about having threatened Mr. Anderson because she needed the money to attend college out of town. Simon then apologizes and urges Nicole to take the money to the police so that Mr. South can clear his name. She then agrees to guide Simon and Maddie to the location where she'd buried the money. Simultaneously, the scene shifts to Sandra, who's seen counting money in an envelope and hiding it in Maddie's room. Before they leave, Maddie crosses paths with Dawn and expresses her gratitude to her. Furthermore, she apologizes for triggering her painful memories and assures Dawn that she deserved better and that she's a good friend. As Maddie hurries to catch up with Simon and Nicole, the lights flicker, revealing that Dawn has crossed over. On the other side of the school, Rhonda, Charlie, and Wally find this strange, as they didn't experience the goosebumps or see the lights flicker when Janet, a fellow spirit, crossed over. Afterward, Maddie watches from the school fence as Simon and Nicole dig for the money. Unfortunately, the money's nowhere to be found, and Simon asks if she was followed on the night of the homecoming dance. Nicole then points out that she went to Sandra's house first before hiding the money. In a tense moment, Maddie has a sudden memory flash of a heated argument between her and her mom. Simultaneously, she, Simon, and Nicole notice a mysterious person wearing a hoodie walking behind them in the woods. As Simon and Nicole chase the hooded figure, Rhonda, Wally, and Charlie approach Maddie. Unexpectedly, Maddie reveals that she urgently needs to speak with her mother, suspecting that her mom might be her killer after all. Following this, Simon scours through Maddie's room, hoping to find the money Sandra hid there. He eventually stumbles upon the envelope, only to discover that it contains Maddie's necklace instead of money. Meanwhile, Xavier, Nicole, and Claire debate about whether they should confess all they know to the police. Ultimately, they decide to reveal the information only when they can provide concrete evidence to support their claims and save Mr. South. At the school, the Afterlife support group gathers for a meeting, collectively wondering why they didn't experience any noticeable changes when Janet transitioned to the afterlife. Mr. Martin reluctantly admits his inability to explain the peculiarity, becoming visibly agitated by their persistent questions. He then proceeds to recount the story of his own demise, revealing that he was a teacher who saved his students during a fire, but couldn't save himself. Mr. Martin then acknowledges that he's been trying to help them for the past 60 years, but still lacks all the answers. In class, Simon learns from a teacher that Maddie was supposed to receive an award. He then seizes this opportunity to invite Sandra to the school to accept the award on Maddie's behalf. At the police station, Xavier tries to talk to his dad about Mr. South, emphasizing the janitor's alibi on the day of Maddie's disappearance. Their conversation spirals into another heated argument as Xavier confronts his dad about his incompetence in handling the case. Before leaving the station, Xavier takes a photo of a new lead the police have recently discovered, which includes an address to a house. He then asks Nicole and Claire to accompany him to the house, where they notice signs of a potential break-in. At that moment, Claire proposes that they stake out the house in an attempt to identify who might visit. Meanwhile, Charlie talks to Rhonda about her recent disinterest in crossing over. He speculates that Rhonda's wrestling with something, but she refuses to open up, leading to a conflict between them. Ultimately, Charlie recruits Wally to help him delve deeper into the circumstances surrounding Janet's death. They then sift through old school files and stumble upon an article detailing her demise. To their shock, they discover that Janet had actually died alongside Mr. Martin in the accidental fire that occurred in the school lab. This reveals that Mr. Martin had lied about being the sole casualty, raising questions about the truth he'd kept hidden for decades. As Sandra arrives to accept Maddie's award, Simon guides her to the classroom where Maddie's spirit's present. Subtly, he broaches the topic of Maddie's passing, eventually leading to a discussion about the necklace. It's then revealed that on that fateful day, Sandra and Maddie had a heated argument over Sandra's use of her college fund. Maddie then expresses her deep disappointment over her mother's refusal to go to rehab and her failure to understand the challenges Maddie's faced, with college being her only escape. It comes to light that the money Sandra had used for the investment was the only thing Maddie's father had left for her. Frustrated, Maddie then threw her necklace at her mother. After Sandra left, Maddie stayed in the basement, crying uncontrollably. As this conversation unfolds, Maddie begins to recollect the events of that fateful day, leading to her realize that her mother was not responsible for her death. As the ceremony unfolds, Mr. Martin approaches Maddie and comments that she's fortunate to have received a goodbye. Maddie then responds by expressing her readiness to say her own farewell and write her obituary, indicating her willingness to make peace with her death. Meanwhile, Nicole, Xavier, and Claire recognize the importance of finding concrete evidence to honor Maddie's memory. They decide to investigate the house and venture inside, with Claire remaining behind as their getaway driver if needed. Shortly after, Claire notices a hooded figure entering the house and becomes alarmed. She then rushes inside to inform her friends, inadvertently leaving the truck keys in the vehicle. Regrettably, the mysterious figure manages to escape and drives away, even hitting Xavier in the process. In the midst of this chaos, Nicole swiftly retrieves her phone and records the departing car, only to be astounded that she sees Maddie's face reflected in the rearview mirror. Despite the shock and confusion, she remains composed, focusing on tending to Xavier's injury. Meanwhile, Charlie and Wally delve deeper into the mysteries they've uncovered and head to the basement in search of additional evidence. In the basement, they come across Mr. Martin's notebooks, which contain the obituaries of the spirit students and details of their experiences in the afterlife. It becomes evident that Mr. Martin has been meticulously documenting their deaths and studying how they've been coping in the afterlife. Furthermore, they discover another article about the fire, revealing that Mr. Martin was the one responsible for it. Among the notes, they find another article related to the fire, which shockingly reveals that Mr. Martin was the one responsible for the tragic incident. Shortly thereafter, Rhonda joins them, admitting that her suspicions regarding Mr. Martin began when Maddie became a ghost. She then started monitoring his activities and discovered his obsessive pursuit of the objects the students had with them when they died. Wally and Charlie are left in disbelief by this revelation, and Rhonda insists that she refuses to become a victim of a disturbed teacher yet again. As they discuss these troubling findings, someone locks them inside the basement, and their efforts to open the door prove to be futile. Meanwhile, Simon sets out to locate Maddie, who confides in him about writing her obituary. As she reads it aloud, he receives a message from Nicole, clearly showing Maddie driving away in Xavier's truck. Simon begins to doubt his own sanity, believing that Maddie's ghost may be a twisted coping mechanism he's using to cope with her running away. He then abruptly leaves, leading Maddie to follow him. However, she finds herself in the basement, where she hears Charlie, Wally, and Rhonda urgently calling for help. Finally, Maddie's memory begins to piece together the events of the day she vanished, including hearing cries for help from the basement. As she cautiously opens the door to investigate, she witnesses a confrontation between Mr. Martin and Janet, or rather their spirits. Before she can fully grasp the situation, Janet rushes at her with such force that it hurls her backwards, causing her to collide with the wall. In an unexpected turn of events, Janet takes control of Maddie's body, effectively forcing Maddie's own spirit out. In the present, Charlie, Rhonda, and Wally urgently warn Maddie against trusting Mr. Martin, who stands angrily at the basement stairs. Meanwhile, Janet, now possessing Maddie's body, buys a bus ticket to leave town. On her way, she stumbles upon a missing poster of Maddie and callously tears it apart, leaving her actions and intentions shrouded in mystery.